All right, I'm sure this audio is going to be awful. So let me just get this stream shared and then we'll start talking. Anthony is here. All right, so wait for a few more people to get in, but this is going to be a little bit of a different stream, a different topic than usual on this channel, but it's going to be interesting and fun, and we will get into it. So, 1 second here. Okay, Peter's here. That's enough. We only need Peter and Anthony here. So anyway, we're going to talk about the ZF8 platform used from 2013 to until current on Chrysler vehicles, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, so on and so forth. So this is an 8-speed transmission. The 8HP70 is used on the Ram 1500 trucks and the Chargers and Challengers, both the 5.7 and 6.4 liter engines. Now, these transmissions from the factory are programmed to shift very, very softly, and there's a lot of slip programmed into these just from low pressures. So this here is just a graph on, this is a 2014 Ram. This is actually my vehicle, but with a 2017 ZF transmission, because the original one failed. And when you look at the clutch pressures on the 2014 version, they're a lot lower than the 2017 version, and that's most likely because they figured out that having your clutch pressure set to 19 psi in some shifts is not a good idea. But anyway, first off, I'm using HP tuners. That's what I use whenever I do anything with one of these transmissions. But you want to make sure you do a full read on the vehicle, and after that you have the trans tab. Here there's general, and you see here there is manual transmission A580. The A580 is the NAG1 transmission. It's another good unit there. Then 4-speed, 8-speed, CVT, whatever. So 8-speed is enabled. TCM, RPM limit. This is the limit, and this is the RPM limit for the transmission that it's set as. Now, if you exceed this, so if your engine speed is set to above this, what's going to happen is it's going to hit that. Where is it here? It should be somewhere in here. It's been a while since I've been in here. Should be cut off. Yeah, cut off. So yeah, here's our RPM limits, right? So 6,300 RPM, the TCM is set to 6,380. There's always going to be some overshoot, especially if the torque converter is unlocked. Now, if you exceed 6,380 RPM, or whatever the TCM limit is, it's going to activate transmission limpo mode. I believe it's going to be stuck in third gear, and your converter is going to be unlocked. Being stuck in third gear sucks, and your converter being unlocked all the time is going to generate a lot of heat. So I see a lot of times what people do, they set their RPM limit higher, then they panic. Oh no, my check engine light is on and now my vehicle won't shift, or this and that. Well, you need to set both if you change your RPM limit on the engine, you need to set it for the transmission. Typically what I do, I will set this to 6,700 on the engine, and then it depends. Also, it depends on your application. You're not going to spin a stock 5.7 to 6,700 RPM. Let me pop up chat on my phone here so I can monitor that. Not that there's going to be many people in here. But let's see, where is my live chat here? I'm definitely a boomer when I don't know how to find live chat on my phone. Oh well. Let me see. Let me try this. Request desktop. There we go. Okay. So what I'll typically do, it depends, like again, it depends on the engine, it depends on the camshaft choice, it depends on a lot of factors, but generally 6700 is pretty safe on most of these. I probably would not spin one of these engines with stock pistons above 6700 RPM. But I'll set this to 6700, and then the transmission, we want to go a little bit above that, just a little bit, so we could just do 6780, but you want to make sure this is at or above it, because if you hit this limit, it will throw it into limp home mode, and it is a pretty violent thing when it happens. It will immediately shift to third gear at max line pressure. It'll get your attention. It feels, whenever one of these hits limp home mode like this, it feels like something breaks. So it's an easy mistake to make. Make sure that's set here. So we don't really have to do anything on this tab here for changing anything. Skip shift hardware, none of these do skip shifts. None of them have skip shifts enabled. What skip shifts are is sometimes you could program a transmission to, instead of shifting to 1 to 2, you could do 1 to 3, 3 to 5, so on and so forth. None of these do it, so we don't have to worry about it. Shift general max mode. Now max mode is a performance mode on these, and most cases it's not enabled. Okay, so on this particular TCM it's set to 0, so allowed mode 0. Now when we go into allowed modes, we're going to go over to shift pressures. Okay, now on the trucks, you're going to ever be in normal. Okay, on the cars, so on the Charger RT, Challenger RT, whatever, these mean different things. So max mode is typically not used. Max mode is usually, I don't know, I can't answer what max mode is used for. Max mode is kind of interesting, it's kind of different. But I can't answer what max mode is used for, but I know it's not really used. Your normal mode, this is your normal driving mode, whatever. Your performance mode, or perf, that's performance on Chrysler vehicles, this is going to be sport mode. So on the Uconnect screen, when you select drive mode sport, it's going to be using the clutch profiles from this. And then if you select track mode on enabled cars, then it's going to use the sport tables here. Now if we look at our 1 to 2 shift, right? Okay, let's go back to it. Let's go to a table. So this is our clutch pressure from 1 to 2. This is our oncoming clutch pressure. This is the amount of pressure that's going to be used to engage the clutch for the 1 to 2 shift. So you see here at 518 foot-pounds of torque, we have 84 psi at 5,400 RPM. Okay, now let's look at our sport mode 1 to 2. And this is in bar. We don't want bar. We don't do things in bar here. Okay, so at the same RPM, it's up a little bit to 97. Okay, so the pressure is a little bit higher. And then sport mode, wow, it went up a lot, right? Well, we could see our RPM went up, or this would be track mode, right? So we're at 150 psi, or 120 at 518, and you know it's much higher. So that's clutch pressure is one part of it. Now I see so many on either handheld tuners, custom tunes, whatever. What they do is they go in the engine setting and they disable torque management. They just everything here, they just disable. They just disable everything. Disable, 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 which is fine in some instances. But what you need to remember, the more torque the transmission handles, the slower the shifts are going to be, the more pressure that you need. Okay? So you get, hang on one second here. The more torque you handle, the more pressure you need to engage the shift. If you were to disable all of the torque management on, and I know like a lot of SCT handheld tuners do this, and they're not able to program the transmission, so they will they won't program the transmissions. But if you select any of the performance tunes, they disable all the engine torque management, so it's 100% of the torque applied to the transmission during the shift. Well, if you do that on a non-worn out transmission, it's going to be fine. It's going to shift slow, but it's going to be fine. If you do it on a worn out transmission, it's probably going to slip. So if you are going to disable all your torque management, you need more clutch pressure. So when you have more clutch pressure and low torque management, the shifts will be pretty violent and they'll chirp the tires. It's a pretty violent thing, but if you care about transmission longevity, leave torque management on. You could adjust your pressure a little bit. If you are going to disable all torque management, what I would probably do here is really depends. There's a couple ways that you can go about this. So another major part of the ZF is adaptives. No matter what you set this to, it's going to down adapt, okay? Because it's trying to meet a slip target. It's trying to meet a slip target into the TCM, which you cannot change. So no matter what you do, it's going to. Now, sometimes I see people do this. They'll just set this to 100 or 120, whatever, which is fine, right? What I find when you do this, it works fine. You know, it's going to be a very, and this is we're only going on if your torque management is disabled. If your torque management is on, we need to go a completely different way about this. But if torque management is disabled, you need more pressure. What you could do is something like this, 100, right? That will give you a very firm shift. But what's going to start happening, it's going to start altering this table from adaptives, and usually how it'll present when the pressures get low, your shifts will be softer and you'll usually get a flare as it shifts. It's pretty uncommon to get a flare on 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. You typically will see flares happen on, you know, your upper gears, 5 to 6, 6 to 7. And how you can counter that, okay, is what you're going to want to do if you're having a flare on any of these. And honestly, when you look at all of these pressures, okay, 2 psi. So this is, let's say you're on the freeway, you give the vehicle, you know, your heavy acceleration, and you let off. When you let off, it's going to be up here in the, you know, 35, 0, negative torque, whatever. 2 psi is not much to move a clutch, okay? And basically what's going to happen is the clutch is just going to slip into place from the engine torque. So if you're having a flare, what a shift flare is it'll shift, right? And the RPM is going to jump up 300, 400 RPMs, whatever. What I would do is probably go up by 5 psi increments on the gear that is flaring. Okay, so just up it just a little bit, right? And you could go higher, whatever. It's all by feel. But if you have no torque management enabled, what you could do is something like this: set all your shifts to your liking. And what you could also do is, you don't have to have it all at 100. You could do 80, right? You could do 80 at 80 psi, 100 psi, whatever. It's all based on feel. And another very important thing is every transmission is different, okay? You could have some transmissions that will shift very firmly at 60 psi, but another shifts very hard at, or very soft at 60 psi. It's all based on how much wear is going on, how much pressure loss, etc. But again, if you have no torque management, you might want to do something like this: keep the pressures high, and then add to the upper limit if you have a flare. What you could just do is what I would do is just add, you know, 5 psi there. Now, there's very, very important also on all the ZF8. So this is the ZF 8HP70, 90, whatever. 3 to 4 and 6 to 7 are much more sensitive to pressure than the rest. If you set okay, so let's look at like track mode, right? Look at how on 2 to 3 is like 133 psi, and on 3 to 4, it's only 75 psi. Well, if you go through and add 100 psi to 3 to 4, you're probably going to break something. So you need to be mindful on the ZF8 that 3 to 4 and 6 to 7 is much more sensitive. And I've seen some files, usually on Hellcats, what they'll do is they do this, okay? There's usually a range here, right? So, yeah, so 0 to 185 is the range. What they'll do is they'll just max it out. They'll just go 185, right? So, yeah, they're going to just do this. They're not going to care. I added 265, whatever. But a lot of tuning companies will do that. They just max it all to 185. Now, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, you might get away with that. It's going to give you a little bit of whiplash, but if you do that on 3 to 4 and 6 to 7, something is going to break eventually, whether that's your drive shaft or internal transmission components. So what I like to do is just look around, all right, so we see a pattern here. On all of these tables, our 3 to 4 has a little bit lower pressure than the rest of them, right? So it's 61, right? All of it's lower. So we're not going to want to apply that much pressure. So if we're doing 100 here on 2 to 3, we might do, no, hang on. We're going to close this. Here we go, 100 replace. So if we're doing 100 on 2 to 3, I might do, instead of that, let's just do 65, right? And we can go back and adjust, right? It's all based on feel. It's all making adjustments, driving it, seeing if you want more pressure, less pressure, so on and so forth. And like I said, you just want to go through here. Oncoming ramp, you don't have to really touch this. You don't. Some TCMs don't have oncoming ramp. Some do, some don't. You don't generally have to touch it if you're doing a tune with no torque management or something. Full offset, I don't recommend touch anything on full offset. If you absolutely want to change these, if you just are like, I have to change this, I want to change them, what you can do is you can copy these from your track mode, right? And make sure to copy the labels on HP tuners. You can let's go to column axis, right? Copy labels, and row axis, copy labels, and just copy and paste all these tables over if you want to do that. You could also do that for this, right? You could do the same thing. You could just copy your sport tables over to normal and it will shift like it is in track mode. And you can do that for so on and so forth. Shift timing. Okay, this is a pretty important aspect also. Nominal slip time. All right, this is a little bit tricky. Nominal slip time. Nominal slip time is the amount of time that torque management is applied to the given shift. It's not the amount of time the transmission is actually slipping. Nominal slip time is the amount of time that torque management is being applied during the shift. Okay, if you look at our normal 1 to 2, okay, look at these timings, right? And look at our sport timings. They're much lower because it's applying torque management for less. Now, torque management will use spark, fuel, throttle body, whatever, so on and so forth. What you can do for nominal slip time, and this is the only, I do not recommend screwing with any of these values. If you want to change it, I would recommend either leaving it alone or copy and pasting each of these tables over, whichever you prefer, whichever feel you like, track or sport, whatever. Just copy those over with the labels, and that's good. If you copy them without the labels, if there's any differences, most likely you'll pull a code for some nonsense. Ramp time. Ramp time is pretty important, and if you really don't want to get into messing with anything that could potentially ruin your transmission, ramp time is what you want to do. Ramp time is the amount of pressure on your clutch pressures. So here's your clutch pressures right here. Ramp time is the amount of pressure, or how long it takes to get from 0 to 100 psi or 0 to whatever psi. That's what ramp time is. So if you zero out ramp time or set it to a low value, right? So what I do, typically, I just zero it out. So this is in time, not psi. And we don't, Okay, so what I will do is just zero it out. Sometimes when you zero it out, it does not actually go through or it acts weird. If it does that, just set it to 10, okay? Just 10 milliseconds across the board for every shift. And that will, instead of allowing it to take a whole second to build the PSI, it will just, as quick as possible, as quick as the valve body can provide it. And that's a good way to crisp up the shifts if you don't want to mess with anything else. Now, torque converter, it depends. If you have a stock torque converter, leave all this alone. You don't need to slip a stock torque converter. I guess if you're going to be on the track, you can set this to 0, and that will not allow the torque converter lock. You don't really... So, torque converters multiply torque. So if you stall a torque converter at like 3,000 or whatever the stall speed is, typically it will multiply the torque almost by 2. So if your engine is making 300 foot-pounds, it'll multiply the torque to around 600 foot-pounds. Very rough estimation. Now, if this is set where it's locked up all the time, none of that is going to happen. In stock, these vehicles are going to have, it's going to be locked up all the time. It's going to be locked up from the start. So you're not going to have any of that. Now, sometimes you'll see the torque converters unlock through all the gears like this, or some people. I don't like doing it that way because, because if you leave it unlocked, one, you're losing 15 to 20 horsepower or more. Secondly, there's going to be, it just feels very loose. It feels like the transmission's slipping, but it's not. And third, it generates a lot of heat. It's a lot of pressure on the fluid, a lot of heat being generated, and these already run hot enough as it is. So it's just not, I just don't recommend it. You're not really benefiting anything other than launch torque, in my opinion. So I would just leave first gear unlocked. That way, if you're going to launch the vehicle, you get the benefits of having a torque converter. Otherwise, leave it locked. And don't have to mess with any of this, really. Performance mode, torque converter performance mode, I don't think this is even used, to be honest. I don't quote me on it, but I don't think I've messed with this. I have not been able to find a difference in any of the settings or any of the feel of it. It just does not seem to make a difference. But what you can do is, instead of setting it to 95, set it to 50%, okay? It'll engage torque converter performance mode if 50% throttle is applied. Slip, again, any of this stuff, I don't recommend it because they're different between vehicles and a lot of it's read-only. It's just, I've never noticed a difference, and ultimately, you don't need to mess with anything to achieve what you want. Now, torque management. Here's the big one. Okay. None of this stuff here is going to matter if your torque management in your engine table is disabled. And a lot of people do not understand that. So you could change whatever you want in any of these, but none of that's going to matter if your engine torque management is disabled. So that's why I kind of recommend leaving engine torque management disabled and, changing this. It's a common misconception that reducing torque management leads to a quicker shift. It doesn't. It leads to a slower shift because there's going to be more slip. You need more pressure for shift that torque management is disabled. There's less torque management. So the more torque management you have, the more snappier and quicker the shift is going to be. Okay, if you look at track mode, right? Let's look at normal. Okay, normal is going to pull, between 100 foot-pounds and 177 foot-pounds of torque. But track mode is pulling 292 foot-pounds of torque. And now, how it's doing this, it's closing the throttle body. It's basically causing the engine. It's basically a very controlled stall within the shift. But by doing so, the engine isn't outputting as much torque, and the shift can be faster. Typically, when you have this much torque management applied and the pressures that are seen in track mode, the shift is going to be very snappy and hard. Now, a hard shift is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. There's less slip. But if you don't like the way, honestly, it's a preference. I've run both ways. I've run with torque management on and torque management off. If you don't want to replace your transmission within 30, 40, 50,000 miles, then I would say leave torque management on. If you have a stock 5.7, then you could probably turn torque management off and it's not going to make a difference on transmission longevity. But try both ways. Like I said, there's two ways to go about it. If you're going to leave torque management on, how I would tune one of these ZF transmissions is I would copy these tables over, okay? I would just copy all these over with labels over to your normal and see how you feel. You could save one file in performance mode, the other one in sport, the other one in max, see which one you like better. That's a good way to do it. It's kind of idiot proof. Just make sure your labels are right. If you are going to shut off torque management, then I would recommend doing something like this, something along these lines, and going from there. And you'll notice the shifts will be totally different. If you have torque management applied, you're not going to chirp the tires between shifts. If torque management is off, then you're going to. And leaving torque management off is a lot more stressful on your rear end, your U-joints, so on and so forth. Again, downshift, I don't mess with downshift. Downshift, if you're not careful with downshift, it's pretty violent and you could potentially cause an accident, because typically with downshift, you actually add torque, you don't reduce it. So in this case, it'll actually tell the PCM to rev up the engine a little bit to help with the downshift. And when like coming to 2-to-1, okay, if you're coming to a stop, some of the 2-to-1 downshift is at a ridiculously low engine speed. It will rev the engine up and it'll lurch forward, and that could potentially cause an accident. So I honestly don't recommend messing with downshift. You don't need it, and it's aggressive enough. Even on the normal, even on a Ram 1500, it's still pretty aggressive. So I really don't recommend it. If you want snappier downshifts, what you can do is just adjust everything from like 8 to 7, so on and so forth. And you see on track mode, it's adding a lot of torque, right? So what if you want to mess with downshifts, then I would leave everything beyond fourth gear alone. So just do the top half. And that's what I would do. Again, it's by feel. Again, if you don't want to break anything, be mindful of 3 to 4, the pressure you use on 3 to 4, and 6 to 7, because these are very sensitive gears and you can break those if you apply too much pressure. There's generally no surefire safe pressure. You could break something at a low pressure on one transmission. You could not break something at a much higher pressure on another transmission. What you have to remember also is you're not getting 100 psi to the clutch packs. There's always going to be some pressure loss. That's going to differ based on transmission wear. So it's all by feel. It's not, and this is one thing about hand tunes, from handheld tuners or people that just send you a file. It's every transmission is different, honestly. Engines are different, but transmissions are special, and that's why stuff gets broken. You see a lot of people with broken stuff because one might tolerate 160 psi. For example, my original one, I was at 160 across the board, and it barely was firm. On this one, anything above 80 is going to give you whiplash, basically. So again, it varies between transmission. What you need to know is just be careful, little changes at a time. By little changes, I don't mean 5 psi. You're not going to feel it, but 20 psi at a time, go up. If you have a bone stock vehicle and you want to add, do something to it, what I would say is just copy and paste your sport or your performance tables over and see how it feels, and go from there. Another thing you could simply do is just go through and add 20 psi to all these tables. That's a very safe way of improving it. And another very important thing to do is to reset the adaptives before and after everything you do here. So, not before, I'm sorry, exhausted, but after, what you're going to want to do is before you drive it, you're going to want to reset the adaptives, and you're going to go up here to Vehicle Controls and Special Functions, Transmission, Reset Adaptives. Sometimes it'll take 2 to 3 times, but eventually it will go through and it will reset the adaptives. So that's pretty much for this. I'm pretty sure no one's going to watch this because it is a very different type of content than what I'm used to. But let's see. Anyway, that's pretty much it. That's just a little overview. I could go into a lot more detail on all this stuff. I guess one other thing is on torque management, you're not going to want to mess with forced torque intervention. I just leave it alone. Just go to main torque intervention if you're going to mess with any of that. So you don't have to worry about any of that. Again, to recap, shift timing, nominal slip time. This is the amount of time torque management is applied. If torque management is disabled in the engine side of things, it's not going to do anything. Fill time, I guess I didn't cover that. Fill time. This is the amount of time the drum is filled with fluid between shifts. You could leave it alone, honestly. I would just leave it alone. You could set it to 100. I would just leave it alone. If you absolutely want to change it, then what you can do is copy it over here. Personally, I find they shift a little quicker when you leave them a little bit higher like that. I don't know if it's because there's more fluid in the drum or what. I can't explain it. Oncoming inertia mode delay, you don't really need to mess with any of this. The main feel is going to be your clutch pressures, okay? Your clutch pressures and your ram time. That's the most important thing to change here. Again, ram time, just zero, and you should be good. And that will crisp up the shifts. If you have just a bone stock vehicle, let's see, what is the file here? Here's a Demon file. So the Dodge Demon makes a lot more power than a 5.7, obviously, and you could see that they run much higher PSI, of course. Totally different story, but if you're just looking to crisp up your shifts a little bit, what you could do on any of these is just go to your shift pressures, add 20 PSI to each of these tables. And when I say add 20, I mean to the bottom half. So we're not going to want to go anything to the top. We might want to add, what I could say is we could add 5 PSI to the top half and 20 PSI to the bottom half to all of these. Go over here to shift timing, zero out ramp time, and that should firm up the shifts a little bit. You could add more pressure if you want, so on and so forth. But that's just a very jumbled, quick overview of my, I don't even know why I decided to make this video. It was just like I want to talk about it before falling asleep for some reason. But yeah. So anyway, that's it for right now. And thank you for watching, to the probably half a person that watched this. So thank you very much.